So good morning. This is Friday, December 11th. The nightmare that we know as 2020 is almost gone. Thank you, Lord. Um, and so for social sciences, we've been talking about the risks that celebrities take by speaking out. Oops, wrong one. So let me cue up our lesson for today.
This little girl was kicking me in my stomach all night.
Oh, wait till they get bigger. It hurts even more. You ever had a set? You ever wake up with a 9-year-old foot in your mouth? Yeah, I have. A whole foot right in your mouth. They don't even be caring. It's coming.
No type of manners, like
They're kids. You was a kid once. You did the
I
same
know I'm
thing.
playing. I know. That's why I need to go back to Vietnam. I don't want to go back to that. I'm good. Uh,
So real quick,
wow.
since you're here, that's going to be checkpoint number 2. I kind of already explained that to you, what you're going to be doing. Um, I put a boatload of information on Summit, a lot, including all the PowerPoints. So you should be able to go to Summit and find the information that you need for these checkpoints. Plus, I'm always available in the afternoons from 1 to 3. Most of the time, kids don't show up, but if you needed to make an appointment with me, I could always show you, what I wanted you to do if you have any problems with that. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Um, okay, so we've been talking about the different aspects of celebrities giving back to their communities. And the first topic that we talked about was this shared sense of responsibility. Is there a responsibility for celebrities to give back to their communities? And in what capacity should they give back? So today we're shifting to a different thought. I know it says 12:10 and today's the 11th, but I have another class. So the essential question that I want you to think about is, what do athletes and celebrities risk when they speak out or protest? We know that the Constitution of the United States provides us with the ability to protest, peacefully protest things that we see as injustices in our society. But sometimes when athletes and celebrities speak out or protest against something, they lose endorsement deals. We talked about what endorsement deals were before, and I just want to look at some of the top people who lost endorsement deals because they chose to make a stance on some type of social issue. Let me find a new page here. So let me share this with you. Okay. So some of these celebrities you may know, some you may not. I really wasn't considering whether or not the population of students knew these people. I just wanted to show you that it is possible for some people to lose endorsement deals for taking stands on what they believe. Um, so I think there were 7 here total. So the first one was Sharon Stone. And Sharon Stone was an actor from the 90s. You guys may not be as familiar with Sharon Stone as I am. But she spoke out against a earthquake. She suggested that the earthquake was karma because of Beijing's treatment of Tibet. She later apologized, but it was too late, and she lost her endorsement deal with Christian Dior, which is like I guess they're like a luxury type of retailer. So she took a stand. Whether her opinion was correct or not, or accurate, she still stood up and made a stand on a social issue and because of that, she lost her endorsement. Gilbert Gottfried. Gilbert Gottfried is a voice actor. He was a comedian in the 90s. He has that really high-pitched voice. Sounds a little funny sometimes. But he lost his, he used to be the voice for the Aflac duck. And he lost his endorsement because he made a string of jokes on Twitter referencing a massive tsunami that hit Japan. Aflac does a lot of business in Japan, and the humor did not go over well with their population, so he lost his endorsements. Hank Williams Jr., who was he's an entertainer, more of a country singer, and he made some controversial comments about Adolf Hitler, and he ended up losing his job. He said some negative stuff about Barack Obama, basically comparing Barack Obama to Adolf Hitler, which was not a smart move. And he lost his contract with Monday Night Football, which was quite lucrative. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg is an actor and entertainer. She's been around for quite some time. But she spoke out against President George W. Bush in 2004. And so Slim Fast, who was her endorser at the time, decided to drop her from their label or from their brand because of some of the remarks that they said were too offensive. Sybil Shepherd, she is an actress. She's been around for quite a while. She had a lucrative contract with the American beef industry. And basically she came out and said, I don't even eat red meat. I don't eat beef, which is kind of counterintuitive to being a spokesman for beef products when you say, I don't even eat beef or I don't eat red meat. So that kind of blew up in her face and she lost endorsement. Manny Pacquiao, who's from the Philippines. He was a boxer and a promoter. And he said something on Instagram, and he made some homophobic remarks, which is basically saying negative things about people who have different sexual orientations. And it lost him, it doesn't say exactly, but I'm sure that having a contract with a major supplier like Nike was a loss of a lot of money. And the last one was Ryan Lochte. He was a swimmer. He was basically supposed to be the next Michael Phelps. And he just did all kinds of craziness. All kinds of craziness. He made up some stories about being robbed at gunpoint. And so he lost Ralph Lauren, Speedo, Airweave, and Gentle Hair Remover. So he lost a lot of endorsements just for speaking out. So that's some of the risks that celebrities take when they speak out, whether negatively or positively on a political matter. So there were some examples of celebrities who lost endorsements. I know we only have Zenalia in the room, so Miss Cat, I guess you could chime in with me. Do you believe that there is a double standard or worse treatment for celebrities who are of color compared to those who are white, or is it the same type of treatment?
My opinion is I feel like it's harder for celebrities of color because I feel like sometimes people expect them to be the spokesperson. So therefore, like, there's a lot of attention on every single thing that they say. And I feel like that's a lot of pressure to have to not that they should have to represent an entire race or ethnicity, but the fact that like society puts that pressure on them, I think makes it difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Cat. And Zenalia, just so you know, like when we saw that list, we saw that Whoopi Goldberg was on that list. You know, she was treated the same as a lot of the other people. You know, she said something that was deemed offensive. Because it was deemed offensive, um, you know, she lost her celebrity. She lost her endorsements. So, question: with those celebrities being taking away um, these endorsements from athletes, is that a violation of the First Amendment right to free speech?
Yeah.
Or they weren't hindered from saying it, but there was consequences from saying it, from saying things. This is a very touch and go subject, um, especially in the Facebook, Instagram, you know, world right now. That people, even regular people now, are losing their jobs, are losing their professions because of things that they've said on social media that have been questionable. Um, I think someone told me one time the key to success is never discuss politics and religion at work. Um, if you want to survive in the professional workplace, keep all those opinions about religion. I think it was religion, politics, and something else. I think it may have been, I learned that early on. Don't bring those three things up in a workplace environment. Because remember, when you become a celebrity endorser, you're actually you're almost a spokesperson for that product. So people attach your actions to the product. Does that make sense? So when someone
Yeah.
does or says something negative, they tend to lose that endorsements. So today we just want to talk about the risk of speaking out as celebrities. This will be our third checkpoint. Um, and the essential question is, what do athletes and celebrity risk when they speak out? So we're going to be looking at the 1960s, the civil rights movement, and the 1968 games, and the risk of speaking out or protest. So to understand the 1968 the 1968 Olympics, you need to understand what was going on in America during the 1960s. There have been, during the 1960s, there was a rise in several Black Power groups. The most common one we know is the Black Panthers. And then we had a civil rights movement due to the treatment of Blacks in America. Malcolm X once said, oh, we have another person. Good morning. Malcolm X once said that by any means necessary, we needed to overcome racial injustice in America. So this was adopted by some of the athletes at the 1968 games. American civil rights movement and social change, particularly in 1968, the Olympic athletes, the Black athletes, threatened to boycott the Olympics altogether. They said, we are not going to take part in the Olympics due to the treatment of the American Negro in America at that time. So I wanted to give you a short video about the civil rights movement. And not it's not really that long. It just gives you the temperature of the country at that time. So let me pull that up for you. Here. Okay, so this is just a summary. I'm going to share it with you of what was taking place in America during the 1960s. This is just a precursor to the 1968 Olympics. So you have some type of idea of what was going on in the 1960s as far as the civil rights movement. I may not get
want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the history of the American Civil Rights Movement. The end of the American Civil War in 1865 effectively meant the end of slavery, but African Americans were in for a long struggle before they were finally awarded equal rights. As of 1870, all eligible male citizens were able to vote. However, blacks were discouraged to by violence and eventually legal stipulations. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled to maintain racial segregation in private businesses in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Soon broadened to include schools, many southern states applied this separate but equal mentality to all aspects of life. However, this led to the application of Jim Crow laws, which resulted in blacks being treated as second-class citizens. Segregated schools, public transit, restrooms, water fountains, and more continued well into the 1900s. In 1909, a group of prominent black and white campaigners created the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. Their goal was to increase racial equality and challenge issues like the Jim Crow laws. Unfortunately, it was between 1910 and 1930 that white supremacist group the Ku Klux Klan saw its biggest expansion amid increased racial friction. Following the First World War, the NAACP was devoted to ending lynching by white vigilantes. By mid-century, the group became instrumental in the Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka court case. This class action suit, filed in 1951, asked that segregation in schools be struck down. Taken to the Supreme Court, the case resulted in the first integrated school in the United States to open in the fall of 1955. Encouraged by the decision, the civil rights movement began to hold high-profile boycotts, marches, sit-ins, and other peaceful protests. These included 1955's Montgomery bus boycott in support of Rosa Parks. A watershed moment came in 1957 when a high school in Arkansas admitted a group of African American students, nicknamed the Little Rock Nine. Protested by fellow students, the governor, and even the state's National Guard, President Dwight Eisenhower eventually intervened to ensure the students' safe passage. By 1962, universities also began integrating, though black students were still met with protests and violence. The Southern Freedom Movement continued into the 60s with support from newly elected President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The violence of the Birmingham, Alabama campaign influenced the president to fully endorse the movement.
A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all.
On June 19, 1963, he proposed a civil rights bill to Congress, which was approved in 1964 after his death with support from President Lyndon Johnson. The bill struck down existing legislation that allowed for discrimination, and its approval was largely influenced by Martin Luther King Jr. and the March on Washington of August 1963.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discourse of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Capturing the attention of the media and the population, this event attracted hundreds of thousands of people in support of civil rights. Following that, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 ended the prejudiced voting system. Instantly effective, blacks began voting and running for public office. However, just days later, on August 11th, a violent six-day riot in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Watts resulted in 34 deaths. This was indicative of a period of racially motivated violence that occurred in the mid to late 1960s. This era also saw the rise of Black Power, led in large part by Stokely Carmichael, in opposition to extremists like the Ku Klux Klan. This ideology was exemplified by the Black Panther Party, which followed the principles set forth by Malcolm X. Rising to prominence in the 1950s, his radical ideas advocated militancy for blacks.
Black people are dissatisfied. They're dissatisfied not only with the white man, but they're dissatisfied with these Negroes who have been sitting around here posing as leaders and spokesmen for black people and actually making the problem worse instead of making the problem better.
He remained an influential and controversial human rights activist until his assassination in 1965. The murders of civil rights leaders continued when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in April 1968 and Robert Kennedy 2 months later. Despite racial tensions continuing into the 1990s, progress has been measurable. The election of President Barack Obama in 2008 is seen by many to be a culmination of centuries of work in favor of racial equality.
This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women and children of every race and every faith can join in celebration across this magnificent mall, and why a man whose father less than 60 years ago might not have been served at a local restaurant can now stand before you to take a most sacred oath.
Okay, so the 1960s was a turbulent time. Let me reshare my screen with you. So during the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement going on in the United States of America. That short little video should give you a little bit of understanding of some of the social climate that was taking place in America. So anytime that a group of people are fighting for their rights, there's always naturally going to be another group who are diametrically opposed to that, whether it be an ideology, whether it be personal beliefs, whether it just be the culture of a group of people. So in the 1960s, we had the civil rights movements, which was a push for Black equality and the outgrowing of Jim Crow laws. So in 1968, there was a group of people who were inspired by Malcolm X to decide that they would boycott the Olympic Games due to the treatment of Black Americans. This boycott it's unprecedented. It didn't take place before, that literally the runners or the athletes involved were in a position where they wanted to boycott the games. So I'm going to give you some background information on why they were boycotting and some of the athletes that actually took place in the boycott. Let's see.
The 1968 U.S. Olympic track and field team is considered one of the greatest ever assembled to represent the U.S. in the Olympics. They won 28 medals and set 8 world records at the Games in Mexico City. The team included some of the fastest runners in the world at the time, like sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who made history when they accepted their medals and then raised their fists during the playing of the U.S. national anthem in a protest full of symbolism. And they almost didn't even show up that year.
Black men and women athletes have unanimously voted to fully endorse and participate in a boycott of the World Olympic Games in 1968.
Members of the team threatened to stay home in protest of racist treatment of Black athletes in America.
They will not participate in the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City unless something is done about these terrible evils and injustices.
So that in case our Black boys don't want to go,
What would they have to do for you to go to Mexico?
boycott is still on.
The story of this silent protest and the boycott that almost was starts with the buttons all 3 medal winners wore that day, the Olympic Project for Human Rights. The Olympic Project for Human Rights, or OPHR, was founded in 1967 by sociologist, educator, and former star athlete Dr. Harry Edwards. It was a coalition of prominent Olympic athletes that threatened to derail American Olympic glory by opting out of the Games, to protest the racism in sports that for decades had gone unaddressed. In the mid-20th century, sports seemed to be a leading example of improved racial equality in the United States. Black athletes like football player Kenny Washington and baseball player Jackie Robinson broke racial barriers by joining professional leagues in 1946 and 1947, which until that point had been whites only. College and professional sports teams gradually integrated from there, years ahead of racial segregation legally ending in the United States.
So the media began to promote the Black athlete as a symbol that racial democracy existed in the United States. If Jackie Robinson can make it, then why can't other Blacks make it? And so it was kind of a factor that was used to dismiss the question of institutionalized racism.
But in the 1960s, the myth of racial progress in America began to dissolve. The Civil Rights Act ended legal segregation in 1964, but Black Americans continued to face institutionalized racism and police brutality.
Integration simply wasn't successful in terms of improving Black people's lives, and you needed to force further change.
Years of frustration ultimately erupted in widespread violent riots.
I think the further we get away from them, we underestimate the influence of the riots. The riots happened in a lot of urban cities across America. Black people still live in terrible socioeconomic conditions in the cities, and that was just as much a problem as Jim Crow laws. So how do you attract attention to that?
A growing Black Power movement and Black student movement in the 1960s emboldened Black athletes to speak up about the racial injustices they endured off the field.
There's no difference between Black and white athlete. We're all out there sweating, we run on two legs. But it's a difference in the way society treats us after we leave the track.
But with the 1968 Olympics coming up, Black athletes saw an opportunity to push for change.
The idea of a Black Olympic boycott had been around since 1959, and it went through various fits and stops until you get to the Black Power Conference in 1967. And the Black Power Conference basically argued that you should use any means possible to force the government to pay attention to institutionalized racism.
For Harry Edwards, that meant organizing the Olympic Project for Human Rights.
I think one of those means that are necessary right now is the Olympic boycott movement and the whole revolt of the Black athlete in this country.
He realized that he could use Black sports participation as a way to attract attention to the problem.
The OPHR had 5 key demands, among them being to disinvite South Africa and Rhodesia, 2 countries practicing apartheid, from competing in the Games, the removal of openly racist International Olympic Committee President Avery Brundage, and hiring Black coaches to U.S. teams. The potential boycott became a hot topic in the news and of debate among athletes.
All the Black athletes want to run, but we don't want to close the door on millions of Black people here in the United States. I don't see a boycott really helping the Negro cause.
In the months leading up to the Games in Mexico City, the OPHR kept members of the press guessing whether they would attend or not.
We will let you know about the future of your Olympic team when we deem it proper and when we feel that you can handle that kind of information. Right now, we just don't think that you're ready.
Tom, when will come a determination whether you, Lee Evans, and others will or will not boycott the Olympics?
I wish I could tell you.
Ultimately, it came down to a vote.
The decision was made that if there wasn't really a kind of unified or the majority of that Black athletes would participate, the boycott would be called off, because those who did boycott, like Tommie Smith, would have been boycotting in vain. Another Black person simply would have taken their place.
Even though most of the OPHR's demands remained unmet, the athletes headed to Mexico City with plans to make their own demonstration if the opportunity arose, which it did on October 16th, following the men's 200-meter final. OPHR members Tommie Smith and John Carlos won gold and bronze, respectively, and Smith set a new world record. After the race, they solemnly approached the medal stand, shoeless, wearing black socks, accepted their medals, and just as the U.S. national anthem began to play, did this. For the full duration of the Star-Spangled Banner, Smith and Carlos bowed their heads and each raised a black-gloved fist in the air to protest the racial injustice in their home country and show solidarity with those fighting for equality. The fists are not the only symbolic gesture in this image, as Tommie Smith explained later.
The right glove signified the power within Black America. The left glove signified Black unity. The scarf that was worn around my neck signified Blackness. John Carlos and me wore black socks without shoes to also signify our poverty.
Additionally, John Carlos wore his jacket unzipped, a violation of Olympic etiquette, to show solidarity with working-class Americans. He also wore beads to honor victims of lynching. And finally, all 3 medal winners, including silver medalist Peter Norman of Australia, wore
buttons reading Olympic Project for Human Rights. There were some boos in the stadium last night.
This moment was the ultimate manifestation of the work of Harry Edwards and the OPHR to intersect outspoken political activism with sport. and it ended Smith and Carlos's Olympics.
When the International Olympic Committee suspended them Friday, their credentials were taken away and they were told they could not stay in Mexico.
They were dropped from the U.S. Olympic team and given 48 hours to leave Mexico. Sports journalist Howard Cosell criticized the U.S. Olympic Committee's decision in this fiery broadcast from Mexico City.
They say the games are sports, not politics, something separate and apart from the realities of life. But the black athlete says he is a human being before he is an athlete, that he wants equality everywhere, not just within the arena.
Tommie Smith and John Carlos were saying black athletes don't have it made in American society. We may be famous, but we face the same discrimination that other black people do. And we don't appreciate being used as a way to counter the black struggle coming out of black communities. Black athletes are black. People have multiple identities. I think Colin Kaepernick is representing a voice in the black community, which is the same thing I think that Carlos and Smith were saying, that the black struggle is more than just about integration and assimilation. It's also about empowering this particular community. And people like Tommie Smith, Harry Edwards, John Carlos came from poor black communities.
Which is why this protest on the Olympic medal stand wasn't just about sports, as Tommie Smith explained to Howard Cosell the next day.
Do you think you represented all black athletes in doing this?
I can say I represented Black America. I'm very proud to be a black man and also to have won the gold medal. And this, I thought I could represent my people by letting them know that I'm proud to be a black man.
Okay. Let me share my screen again with you. So we just saw a video about Tommie Smith and John Carlos. So the first video was to show the climate of the country at the time, very polarized, and racial divisions had finally started to be addressed in American society. So a group of black athletes, they decided to boycott the games due to the treatment of black Americans. They ultimately came to a vote and decided that they would not boycott the games, that they would go. But if given the opportunity to protest, they would. So in 1968, this is when this took place. It's arguably one of the most historic years in modern history. Revered leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. North Korea captured a U.S. ship, and then Olympics athletes raised fists in the Black Power salute. This is an article from 1968. That is for your edification. If you want to read it, you can. And it just gives you a list of all the social issues that were going on during 1968. So the 1968 Olympic Games, now that we have a little background on who these gentlemen are and what they were doing. They were making a protest, a political statement against the treatment of Black Americans. Their names were Tommie Smith and John Carlos. There's links here for just basically telling about the teams. One of them is This Day in History, what John Carlos and Tommie Smith did during the 1968 Olympics. And they were considered one of the most talented teams in history. So black athletes were threatened not to participate, which is one of our vocabulary words is boycott in the games because of social injustice in blacks in America. So I wanted to pose a question for you before we go any further. Do you believe, or do you have an opinion about the risk that these athletes took? And was it worth it for them to give up their individual careers to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves?
I feel like those type of people is the type of people that stand on what they believe before all the fame, no matter what.
Okay, thank you. That's really good. That's a good input, that you believe that these people would have stood up regardless if they were in a Olympic position, that they held to their, some people call it sticking to your guns, or, sticking to your beliefs. But they were willing to sacrifice their own Olympic careers to bring, to bring awareness to the treatment of the American Negro at the time. We saw from the video, there was lots of changes going on in America at that time. But the risk they took, was it worth it?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I personally believe it was, especially on an Olympic stage, because that's a worldwide stage. And if you notice that when they were leaving the stadium, there were boos in the stadium, that people didn't like the fact that they boycotted. And this is a common theme. We saw this when we watched a video about Colin Kaepernick, where they said, yes, they have the right to boycott, but why do they have to do it on the football field? Why do they have to do it on the sports? And the response from me personally would be, where would you like them to protest? We can't protest in the streets because we're being a disturbance. We can't protest on TV because they should just stick to quote Laura Ingraham, she told LeBron James to just shut up and dribble and not to speak out against social matters. So this was at a time where our country was at a boiling point with race and race relations. So they decided to boycott on the Olympic stage when they received their medals. Okay, let me see. I don't know if this is the right one or not. Give me one moment. I know this is a little video heavy. I think did I already show you this one? Let me see.
The 1968
yes, okay,
U.S.
so
Olympic
that's the one I showed you already. So I know that we only saw it once, but I wanted to ask you some questions about the symbolism involved. So Smith and Carlos raised Black Fist. Why did they raise Black Fist? What was the point in them putting the black gloves on the fist? What did it represent? There were two reasons why they had two different gloves on.
Black power?
Yes, one was to recognize Black power, and they had another, and Carlos was also wearing a glove on the other hand. Do you remember what it stood for?
No, I couldn't really hear too much of it.
That's okay. The second glove was for Black unity. They also included a lot of symbolism in their protest. So as the athletes waited to go to the podium, Carlos and Smith told Norman, and Norman is the third party in this. He is the white gentleman down the bottom. And we'll talk about him when we get past Tommie Smith and John Carlos. So Smith and Carlos decided to appear on the podium bearing symbols of protest and strength. Black sock feet without shoes to bring attention to Black poverty. The beads that he wore around his neck was to protest lynching in the United States. And the raised Black glove fists, both of them, to represent their solidarity and support with Black people and oppressed people around the world. So Smith and Carlos expressed their First Amendment right to protest. Now it gets a little tricky because this was on an international stage. This was on an Olympic stage. And this is where we get the issue. This is where a lot of the issues come in. People can, and we're going to talk about this next week about, is there a right way or a wrong way to protest in America? And the consensus, without getting too far ahead, is, I actually read it was a Dr. Seuss book, and it says, you do not want me to protest here, you do not want me to protest there, you do not want me to protest anywhere. The bottom line is that they didn't want them to protest. So I'm gonna address these three questions. So Smith and Carlos expressed their First Amendment right to protest. What happened to Carlos and Smith the next day? Did they continue to participate in the games, or what was their punishment for protesting? Amir, are you with us? Shanice, you with us? Ladies, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm just not sure.
Okay. Well, what happened to Carlos and Smith? They were sent home. They were removed from the Olympics for the rest of the competition, even though one of them had just set a world record for running. So in one moment, they're at the top of their game. They are celebrating the fact that they won not only the gold, but the silver also. So they decided to make a protest. They decided to have a protest in the name of racial injustice. When they did this, they were actually removed from the Olympic team because of their protest before standing up for what they believed in. So do you think it was worth ending their Olympic careers? After all that training, I mean, it takes a lot to become an Olympian. I mean, a lot. We're talking
To help the society that they came from, yeah, it's worth it.
Okay. So I know it's more of a personal opinion. Some people would say, you know, if I did all that work, I'm not going to risk protesting because I can lose my career. And there is a link here for a news article about what happened to Smith and Carlos. Eventually, they were reintegrated into society and went on to play professional football, two of them. So even though they were ostracized from the Olympic team at the time, later in their careers, they moved on to professional football. So I wanted to focus on the third gentleman in the picture. Believe it or not, his name was Peter Norman, okay? And he was an Australian sprinter. You can see that he is going up to the podium with the three men. He's usually the untalked about guy on the podium. He qualified for Olympic team over and over again, passing the fastest time in 1972. Now remember, in 1968, they told Peter Norman right before they went to the stadium, you know, we are going to stage a protest against Black inequality and the treatment of Blacks in America. And Peter Norman was like, I'm on board with you. I agree that people should not be treated differently because of the color of their skin. So this guy, Peter Norman, was actually he was punished more severely by Australian sports establishment than these two gentlemen was by the American. He was the fastest sprinter. And so the next Olympics, rather than send him to the Olympics, they didn't send a sprinter at all. His career was pretty much ruined. He retired from the sport and began to suffer from depression, alcoholism, and a painkiller addiction. At that time, he used his silver medal as a doorstop, silver medal that he won. Unfortunately, Peter Norman died without being acknowledged for his contribution to the sport. When we see that iconic imagery, we automatically go to the Black Power clubs, but we forget that there was a white man who was participating. He was also a celebrity in his own country. Though he kept his silver medal, He was regularly excluded from events related to the sports. Even when the Olympics came to Sydney in 2000, he was not recognized. When Norman died in 2006, Carlos and Smith, who had kept in touch with Norman, were pallbearers at his funeral. We got about 4 minutes left. There's a video here that just, it's from Peter Norman's son. And he talks about the cost of standing up. So we answered some of these questions. Danelia said it was important enough, I spelled podiums wrong. It was important enough for these gentlemen to stand up with solidarity with Black people who were suffering all over the country. Carlos and Smith went back to playing football, and Peter Norman, being a white man, did he need to agree with Carlos and Smith? He wasn't even from America. Do you think that he made a bigger risk at being a white man by going along with this protest? Remember, he was from Australia. He had nothing to do with America at all.
What was the question?
The question, the third gentleman in this picture, Peter Norman, he was Australian. What I'm saying, what I'm asking is, do you think he was taking a greater risk than Smith and Carlos were for standing for Black solidarity, for standing up against police brutality and inhumane treatments of Black persons?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. He took a greater risk, and you could see that his life fell into alcoholism, addiction to painkillers, and believe it or not, for the rest of his life in Australia, people addressed him as the N-word. That's one fact I found out about him when I was researching him. So in his native homeland, they would call him the N-word regularly, simply because he stood up for other Blacks. So this is my last two. This is my last part of class. So, can you guys tell me 2 facts or ideas that you did not know about before the start of this class, whether it be pertaining to the Civil Rights Movement, the 1968 Olympics?
I didn't know that like so many athletes did that, stood up for, because you don't hear a lot of stuff like that.
Okay, and that's why I went
Besides
back.
that one person who did the fist at the what was it,
The
national anthem.
Yes, during that, raising a fist, or raising symbolism for Black Americans. Thank you, Zanelia. What does the word boycott mean? Watch the video.
Take over something in like a group.
Yes, to disconnect, to not take part of. And my last question is, should athletes risk their careers to speak out against injustice and social issues? And this is just an opinion.
It depends on their personal, like if they're selfish, they might not because they care so much about their career, but if they care about society that they live in, then they might. And I feel like they should.
Okay. Thank you, Zanelia, for answering my assessments. So it is 10:20 on the nose. I will be posting checkpoint number 2 for Shanice and Amira came in. This will be your checkpoint number 2. This will go up on Summit. Also on Summit will be this PowerPoint. So if you need to reference back for any information, it will be there. So I hope you learned something today about, the consequences of standing up for yourself. Standing up for yourself and making stands on social justice. We will continue with this. Today is Friday, so we'll continue to look at athletes and celebrities who have risked speaking out, and then we'll go to our next topic, which is there a right or wrong way to protest social injustice? And I'm sure that opinion, when I show you some of the opinions related to that, it might get a little heated. Okay, so Zenalia, Shanice, and Amira, thank you for coming this morning. Thank you for being patient with me. I hope that you're able to learn something today and that you'll ponder in the next couple weeks, is it worth the risk that celebrity takes to speak out for social injustice? Okay, so thank you guys for coming. I'm going to end class now because I have another one in a few minutes, okay?
When is this due?
The checkpoint number 2 will go up today, and I would like to have it done before next Friday. So you'll have a week to do it.
Okay.
Okay. If you have any questions.
When do progress reports come out?
What's that?
When do progress reports come out?
I believe at the end of next week.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Everybody. Have a good morning or a good day from here, and I will see you next week.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.